Good morning, everybody. Welcome to this meeting of the Council's Strategy, Resources and Performance Committee. I would particularly like to welcome Councillor David Ambrose-Smith, who has replaced Councillor Jonas King on this committee. Hello, David. It's nice to see you. The County Council allows filming and photography at its public meetings, so please feel free to take pictures and use social media during the meeting. Can I ask, though, that everyone present turns their mobile phones to silent or vibrate while the meeting is taking place? Please be aware that this meeting is being live streamed and that a recording of the meeting will be available to view on the County Council's website. There is no fire alarm test scheduled for today. If the alarm sounds at any other point, I will adjourn the meeting and we will make our way downstairs out of the main building and turn left. The muster point is at the far end of the building. Before I go to the first item, I would like to pay tribute on behalf of us all to Councillor Mac Maguire, who sadly passed away recently. Mac was the County Council's longest serving councillor, having first been elected to the County Council in 1985 and then again continuously from 1997. During that time, he held a number of key roles, including Chair of Council, Deputy Leader of the Council, Cabinet Member for Highways Transport and Cabinet Member for Community Engagement. He will be greatly missed by members and officers across the Council and our partners across Cambridgeshire, and our thoughts are with his family at this sad time. And I know that there will be an opportunity for more people to pay their respects to Mac at our full Council meeting. We move to agenda item 1, which is apologies for absence. Michelle.
I have apologies from Councillors Corney, Howard, Murphy and Wilson, and Councillors Costello, Goodliffe, King and Slatter are substituting respectively.
Thank you very much and welcome to those members. Does any member wish to declare a disclosable pecuniary interest or non-statutory disclosable interest? I don't see any responses, but if at any time anybody does wish to declare an interest, it's fine to do so at any point during the meeting. Item 2 on the agenda is the minutes of the 19th of December and the action log. Before I ask the committee to approve the minutes of the Strategy, Resources and Performance Committee on the 19th of December as an accurate record, please can I draw members' attention to an error in the recommendation for minute 185, which should state, it was resolved unanimously to note the Treasury Management mid-year report for 2023-24 and endorse it for consideration at full Council. Members have received a revised version of the minutes, and this version has been published on the Council's website. If any member does not agree that the minutes are now an accurate record, could you raise your hand? I see no hands, so I will sign the records in a moment and we will record that as taken unanimously. We will now move to the action log. An updated action log is also included in the published papers for this meeting. Most of the actions are complete with an explanation against the 3 which are ongoing. And we will move to item 3. Councillor Count.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. On page 21, there's an action log. In my opinion, it's quite a simple action. What we asked for is that when we delegate as a committee to an officer in consultation with the chair and vice chair normally, anything, it's left the committee, it's gone somewhere else for final adjustments, should we say, that the committee should be informed at a later date how that went. It's called an action tracker. We've got it at full Council. We see it in lots of places. It's a very, very simple thing. My memory was when we requested this in March of 2023, we actually got support from all the groups, including yourself, Chair. In fact, I know we got support because without that, it would have never become an action tracker because we are in the minority. This was March 2023. It's the sort of low-level exercise that I would have expected to be at the next committee. And yet when you read the comments, it's gone to monitoring officer, it's gone to chief financial officer, the chief executive. They've had a meeting on this. That was August 2023. It's now being implemented. We're looking at how to actually achieve this. I don't understand. I don't understand what the difficulties are. I don't understand why it doesn't exist. Perhaps somebody could comment on why this simple exercise has become so complicated. Thank you, Chair.
I'm not sure I agree that it's been that complicated, but I'm very happy to go to anybody else who would. Does anyone else wish to comment?
Chair, briefly, I'm not sure if the monitoring officer is on the call, and if she's not on the call, I would have to refer to her because I recall discussing this at the statutory officers group some time ago, so we can provide an update to members of the committee as soon as possible. The monitoring officer is on the call, actually, so she may want to comment directly. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Can everyone hear me okay?
Yes, fine, thank you.
Cool. In terms of decisions that are delegated from the committees to officers, they're now available on our website through a delegated decision tracker. So that is implemented. So every decision that is delegated, we record when the officer makes that delegated decision and the reasons for it. So we can provide the link through the website for members to track those, but they are tracked on the website and available to anyone who wants to view them, because we think that's transparent and what we should be doing as well. And Michelle publishes those and chases them up from decisions that are being made as well. So I think we can probably mark that one as complete.
Thank you, Emma. Steve.
Yeah, thank you for that update, Emma. I certainly, in whether it was complicated or not, I regard as 10 months as something being complicated. If not, it should have been done by next meeting. In the action, I've looked at the comments, I've heard the comments you've just made, and I've looked at the action. I think they match up quite well. However, I would like to ask for the minutes of the meeting from the 28th of March 2023 to be re-examined, because I believe the request wasn't that there would be an action tracker on some obscure website. I believe that the action trackers were to report back to committee so we know what happens to delegations once we've made. So could I ask for that to be checked? If this is correct, then that's fine, it's complete. And just a note to us saying that that wasn't part of the request, please. If it was, could we have that dealt with, please? Thank you, Chair.
Michelle.
I wonder if I can assist as just a suggestion. As Emma's quite rightly said, there's a requirement for us to publish a notice, which we do, which is on our website. And yes, I can send you the link. But I wonder whether it would be a better idea for me to actually include it in the action log when there's a delegation. And that way you could always see whether that delegation has been taken, and that would then track it as part of the agenda.
I think if you're happy to look at that, Michelle, that would be extremely helpful. Steve.
Yes, thank you, Chair. And you see how easy it eventually was. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other comments on the action log? In which case we will move on to item 3, which is petitions and public questions. We have received no petitions or public questions. We will move to action 4, item 4, which is the Integrated Finance and Monitoring Report, which is being introduced by Stephen. Thank you very much, Stephen.
Thank you, Chair, and good morning, everyone. This report, as usual, presents the consolidated management accounts for the Council, this case for period A at the end of November 2023. It provides an update to committee, accompanying the budget papers later on in the agenda, of actual and projected financial information regarding our revenue and capital budgets and balance sheet. So giving an overview of the key areas firstly on revenue budgets, the committee can see in the summary table at 2.1.1 or page 34 that the Council's core spending budgets are projecting a £5.6 million overspend or 1% for the year, very similar to the previous forecast report to this committee. The key overall drivers of that position are similar to previous reports. There are large overspends in children education and families, reflecting the national issue of a shortage in and therefore increased cost of placements for children in care with the most complex needs, homeschool transport costs being higher than expected, and increased staffing costs. Overspends within place and sustainability relating to delayed income generation of our green energy schemes are offset by underspends within adult social care, driven by increased income, and capital financing, driven by delayed borrowing need. There remains a large amount of mitigation centrally on the corporate and funding items line, reflecting additional business rates and grant income recognised this year. Directorates are continuing to look for further mitigations to the forecast overspend to bring the in-year position, the pressure down, though that is harder as you get later into the year, but particularly to reduce the impact on the forward budget. The position on ring-fence budgets of public health and the dedicated schools grant is also similar to last month. In particular, I'll draw your attention to the projected deficit on schools grants, which is unchanged from the previous report. Turning to capital, members will see in the table at 4.1, page 39 of the report, that a £1 million or 0.5% underspend is forecast against the net capital budget. This is concentrated in finance and resources and strategy and partnerships, with the other departments currently forecasting only to achieve their underlying budgeted slippage factor. Then on the balance sheet, the final part of the overview, reserves are considered in some detail later on in the agenda, but I'll draw members' attention to the mitigations to the in-year position expected to come from reserves, which is set out in below this to the main revenue summary table at 2.1.2, particularly around mitigations to the waste pressure. The council's borrowing has continued to rise in recent months in line with the expected profile, though later in the year than anticipated. And the table at 5.3 of the report sets out some other balance sheet indicators which are in a similar position to last month as well. So overall, the committee is recommended to note the report and the update to the financial position. But finally, turning to the other recommendation in the report, members will be aware from previous reports to this committee that a legal settlement was reached this year regarding the guided busway. We're seeking a delegation through this report for the Section 151 officer to enable him to earmark these settlement funds into earmarked reserves to be used to fund future busway costs, some of which are in the budget papers later on in the agenda, and to reimburse the corporate reserve that has funded legal costs. And those, the settlement funds are coming through in tranches this year and one tranche in the next financial year as well. So I'll leave the introduction there. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. Any questions for Stephen on this report? Maria.
Thank you so much. Can I possibly just ask you to talk a little bit more about, so I'm looking at 225 to 227 on page 37, so safety valve and the notion that we're currently off track. Could you just give us a bit more on that and if and how we're planning to mitigate the risks of that position? Thank you.
So Michael, I know Steve might want to come in a bit, and we discussed this in the previous meeting, and the information in the report is unchanged from then. But we, as members will know, have had a pressure on the high needs block element of the dedicated schools grant for some time. It's a national issue. Most upper tier councils are in the same position, so we're spending more on high needs spend than we get in grant from the government. That produces a large accumulated deficit on the balance sheet. That is a ring-fence deficit at the moment under current regulations. But it's a big risk for the council, but to try and bring that deficit, the accumulated deficit down, or to reduce the growth year on year in the deficit, we've entered into discussions with the Department for Education and are part of the safety valve programme with a number of other authorities. So we've agreed an action plan to bring that growth and deficit down, and following that, we'll work with the department to bring down the overall accumulated deficit. As the report says, that the action plan for that is somewhat off track, and we've reported that to the department and in the previous report to this committee. So we're working with the Department for Education and internally to reset the actions that are in place to bring that deficit down, and we'll come up with a revised trajectory for bringing it down over time.
Thank you very much. Michael, do you want to add anything or no? Lovely. Okay, thank you. Steve.
Just want to comment on that and then ask a separate question. Sorry, Stephen, you referenced the fact that most councils nationally, upper tier councils nationally, are in the same position. I don't think that goes far enough, because whilst a lot of them are in the same position with a high needs overspend and DSG block, this council had a individual arrangement with government where we agreed to manage costs, etc. It was arranged by the joint administration with the government, and that is specific and wholly owned by Cambridgeshire County Council. It is not the same as any other council in the country. They will either have no deal or they have an individual deal of their own, which is different to ours. The paperwork talks about the drift on our specific deal. So the fact is that this council is failing to stick to the numbers that it agreed with government, and that can't be the same as the rest of the country. The question I've got, actually, which is unrelated to that, is on page 86, and it was just on the expenditure on works to Hereward Hall, and it talks about works being on heating, air handling, etc. And whilst the community centre is separate and Speak House, that they're in there, I don't understand the Hereward Hall element, because I understood that that was marked for disposal. So if we could have a comment for that, please.
Thank you, Stephen. Can I just come back to Michael on which I think is probably on the safety valve comment, and then I'll come back to Stephen for the Hereward Hall.
Yeah, just to clarify, I think what Stephen was referring to related to the factors that are affecting councils up and down the country being similar. So when safety valves were struck, where they were here or at other places, they were struck at a certain point in time, factors such as inflation, the building of special schools, the increased and continued increase in education, health and care plans, and the volume of those are different from our assumptions. And the DfE would recognise and have recognised that that is national trends. So what I think Stephen was reflecting is that other authorities, and we know from speaking to Safety Valve and delivering better value, authorities up and down the country, that our issues are not out of kilter with what the other authorities are finding. And therefore we have a number of councils, I certainly know of 3 that we've been talking to, there are exactly the same discussions that we are having with DfE and their advisors around the revision and the challenge of previously assumed forecasts and how they are progressing. So then that's what Stephen was referring to in terms of the national factors.
Michael, just before we move on to the Hereward Hall thing, can I just clarify something else on that issue, which is that I believe that our deal with the safety valve programme that we have agreed with central government depends on us delivering certain things on time to reduce our spend on special educational needs, and also on government delivering certain things on time, for example, new special schools. I think this paper is recognising that in our part of that deal, we are not on track or quite where we would want to be. Can I just clarify whether government are also on track or not?
Yes, there is one particular school that DfE is responsible for, and that is behind schedule, and that is one of the factors we've been talking to DfE in terms of the position going forward, and any reset if it were to be needed is a major cause, and that has an impact of over £1 million on the recovery programme.
Thank you, that's really helpful. Okay, Bryony, yes, and then we'll move on to Hereward Hall.
Sorry, just to say it's actually 2 schools that we're expecting the DfE to deliver, and both are behind schedule.
Thank you, really helpful clarification. Stephen.
So I think this relates, Councillor Kennedy, to reference 4E on page 67. Is that right? And I think the commentary referring.
3A on 86.
Perhaps, Stephen, if that's
I think, yeah. So the commentary there is explaining why there is a variance against this year's budget, and one of those is that we're expecting the Hereward Hall work not to happen this year, and it had been budgeted for this year. I think potentially the reference to Hereward Hall and any impact with any disposal is probably just a matter of timing between the production of this report back in November and discussions that are yet to be agreed, potentially in respect of the any disposal. So the works that are funded for this budget will be sort of discussed and agreed in line with the wider disposal approach.
Michael, do you want to add some detail?
Yeah, I think Stephen just picked it up there. Clearly, there are proposals being looked at that have been through the Asset and Procurement Committee. They will then go further through this process and the full council process on the 13th. We will look at the exact position in relation to all of our assets, Hereward Hall being one of those. and the requirement for the next stage of that work. So it's still within the programme. It remains within the programme, and further discussions in terms of the next phase of all of our assets, including Hereward Hall, will be looked at post that 13th of February council, and in conjunction with any discussions around the disposal or retention of that site.
Steve.
Yeah, I'm totally aware of the paper that you're referring to, which is the whole estate, and that includes Hereward Hall. My understanding on Hereward Hall was that was emptied of primarily of all staff, only a skeleton presence there a few years ago. I thought that this wasn't a fully utilised building anymore, and it was. I mean, it's quite local to me. I understood it was virtually empty and had been on the proposals for coming out of for quite a long while.
I think Stephen.
Chair, as far as I'm aware, the building's still in use by Children's Services, Adult Services, and one of the reablement teams. I visited them between Christmas and New Year. Thank you.
Thank you. Any further questions? I don't see any further questions. Is this a question, Steve, or no? I think there's an amendment. Is that what? So we'll go to the amendment next. And Steve, I'll come to you on that.
Thank you, Chair. We wish to propose a simple amendment to this paper. It's on 4B, which is about where how to handle the delegation from the Cambridgeshire Guided Busway. The way it reads as it stands to earmark legal settlement funds in relation to the Cambridgeshire Guided Busway kind of indicates that it's going to earmark funds that it receives, but it doesn't say where to, and it also doesn't say when they're received. Now, they're referred to in the body of the report, and there's much more clarity in there about what's received when and where that money is supposed to go to, not just earmark, but for very specific things. So we've lifted those words out, clarified this year, which is all in the actual notes in the report, and we just think that this is a tidying up exercise that the delegation matches the explanation. Thank you, Chair. I believe Councillor Goldstack will second.
Thank you. And I agree. I think your amendment is slightly clearer, and I'm happy to accept it. So unless there's any further debate on that, I think we can probably move. Do you need us to vote on the amendment and then? Fine. So we'll move to the vote on the amended recommendations. Is there anybody? I haven't heard anybody speak against them. So unless there's any objection now, I'll take those as carried unanimously. So thank you very much. Thank you very much indeed, Stephen. And we will move on to item 5, which is the financial sustainability assessment, which Michael will present.
Thank you, Chair. Members will be aware of the high number of high-profile Section 114 reports that have been issued in recent years, latterly at Birmingham and Nottingham City. One of the points of process throughout both setting the budget and in terms of monitoring that is the responsibility of the Section 151 officer in discharging their duty in relation to Section 25 of the Local Government Act. And that puts specific responsibility on that officer in terms of advising members in terms of the robustness of the estimates, making up the budget proposals, but also the reserves that back that position in terms of ensuring the financial sustainability of the local authority. As your incumbent current Section 151 officer, that falls to me to discharge that duty, and this report is put forward in that discharge. And I think it's important that we understand and are all fully aware of our own position, both now and in the future, and how we are planning to address the risks that we are aware of, and even to start thinking about some of the risks that we may think could materialise. This is a fuller report than previous years in order to set out that assessment for further scrutiny and understanding. It does include Appendix 1, what I might define as a reclassification of the risks for the earmark reserves, as well as for a greater explanation of the general fund reserves. And there is a reconciliation to the reserve statements that have been brought previously, including the last item. So the reconciliation at Appendix 2. As I say, the assessment is based on the position known at the time of upload. So members will note the Secretary of State's announcement last week, just as an example of how risk assessments are live and needing to be continually reviewed. And based on the fact that following the Secretary of State's announcement, we expect the final settlement now to be around, or certainly the week commencing the 5th of February. It is highly likely that there will need to be a further review for full council post this meeting and post that final settlement. And of course, none of us are privy to the detail that contains. Finally, just to say that overall reserves are considered adequate by myself. But there are a number of factors which could impact on that assessment going forward that I'd like to reaffirm and that are drawn out in the report, and the need for constant monitoring and consideration of those. One of which we've just discussed in the last item in terms of the position related to high needs. I also draw out our commercial risk in terms of our own ventures, as well as our contractual position. Our overspending and the need to pull back both 23-24 and deliver future year savings. The lack of clarity around future funding, and the fact that as an authority we only have a settlement for 24-25. And finally, our overall borrowing levels, which are high in comparison with our peers, and something that we have started to address through the proposals in the next item. So this is something that needs regular review. There is, though, a high likelihood going forward of a need to continue to increase the reserves if we're not managing those risks that I mentioned and are mentioned in the paper. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Michael. I think this is a new report to this council, but I think it's extremely timely to have it given the stresses that there are facing the whole local government sector. Any questions for Michael on the report? Doesn't look like it. Steve?
I've got quite a few, Chair, so perhaps some indulgence would be appreciated as we go through them. So we've just heard that our level of borrowing is high compared to a lot of councils, and this is borne out in the report. It's a comparator nature, so I'm going to refer to it. This is primarily around chart 2, 3.18 on 95. Now, in terms of we've got £742 million borrowing, I believe. That would be the figure that would be used for this comparator, wouldn't it? Our total borrowing.
The data is actually a year behind, so broadly, but it'd be the end of
roughly
years,
speaking,
right? Yeah, broadly.
Broadly speaking. Okay. Are you aware of just how much borrowing Investor Save the other councils have as their proportion?
Well, I am aware of one of those councils on there, as it was my former council. I do have a certain degree of knowledge of those, and certainly the network, as they are all county councils. I am in touch with all of the treasurers in relation to that. In terms of the specific details off the top of my head, I couldn't recall those, but I certainly have further breakdowns.
Yeah, I think we could do with a further breakdown because actually we've got 300, based on this year's figures, and obviously that's a year out from what you're saying, but 306 out of our 742 million is actually investments that produce money for this council that reduces the burden on us to charge income tax. Now, I don't know what the comparators are for some of the other councils, but when you see some that are down in the 29%, it'd be surprising that they have a high degree of borrowing for invest, and unless they were very wealthy to start off with, and perhaps they were. But if we took that simple extraction, our 97% would drop to 38%. So what I'm saying here is whilst this might be a useful oversight, without that level of extra detail, it's pretty worthless. So that's the first point I'd make. So if you can flush out the other details and come back with that outside the meeting, that'd be useful. Then we would know how much stock to put in this. The second question I've got is, are you aware, because we also have the borrowing to level of debt chart as well. And the same thing there, are we aware of the significant asset base that this council has, which we don't know what the other councils have got? So, for example, I can tell you for a fact, no other county council has the amount of land that we have, because we have the largest farms estate, public owned farms estate in the UK, which is about, I'm told it's 140 million. I'm querying that because at 34,000 acres at £10,000 an acre is 340 million. But I'm told it's 140 million. And we know that nobody else has anything like that. We also have a large buildings estate, which is 25% occupied. We have the Shire Hall there. So do we know, or could you produce something that actually shows how de-risked we are by the fact that we have such significant assets at our disposal?
I'm sure, speaking to the Society of County Treasurers, I can pull together some form of comparator. Just picking up on the first point in relation to some of the others in terms of their split, in terms of their commercial practices, I am aware of a number of those organisations that are named on there that do have significant commercial ventures and borrowing for that. Clearly, there are a number of factors. So the change in the code in terms of the borrowing, in terms of PWLB rates as well, in terms of when some of this is taken. I certainly know one of the councils close to Worcestershire on the left-hand side that use considerable capital receipts in terms of one of its commercial ventures. I think the critical point here, and again, looking at the Slough, Croydon and Thurrock 114 reports and then subsequent inspections, is the management of that risk and the clear oversight of that risk and ensuring that the risk is managed. And that's the fact that I'm drawing out within this report, and absolutely recognise Councillor Coutt's points, and that they play a key facet in terms of the management and the assessment of that risk. But at the moment, that clearly is one of those factors that we need to manage in terms of that commercial estate.
Absolutely. Couldn't agree with you more. I think it's appropriate that we manage risk and get the proper information so that we can manage it. So, for example, we've just drawn out two things where, despite it looking very, very difficult for us on the graphs presented, there are actually further factors that need to be taken into consideration before we can actually take that as a sort of difficult or position or not. And it's by further analysis that we get to that position. We know only from the last S&R committee, the glowing report that the leader, Lucy Netzinger, gave about the way that the Conservatives left the budget last time, not in the difficult positions that other people had left them. I want to just ask a question. Capital receipts can be used for transformation at the moment, can't they? Do you see that likely to change, considering the world that we live in at the moment?
We have the capital flexibilities consultation that is closing, I think, tomorrow. So we will see further direction from government coming out, I think, before the 31st of March. There are a couple of options put forward there that would increase that flexibility, but clearly until the regulations are changed, they are what they are. But government have indicated that they would like to see more freedoms and flexibilities. The question is in terms of what that is spent on, the prudence of that, and the one-off nature of that purpose.
No, I appreciate that. So it's a clear direction of travel. It's either remains roughly the same or it gets increased flexibility, but it doesn't go the other way. But we have various reserves that are in sort of improvement program reserves. Change in digital reserve would be one, where these are things where we're going to use for transformation in the future. But should we receive a capital receipt, then of course that could be used instead, and that's fairly likely that we would be able to for transformation. Would you agree with that, Summage?
I think that needs to be weighed from the Treasury management perspective in terms of all of the options, in terms of our current cash flow position and where we are with some of our borrowing positions and the materialisation and expectation of the capital receipts. I think going back to the former report, we saw that there is a pressure in one of the service areas from an achievement of the capital receipts in this current year. So I think it's a more complex position than that needs to be taken in terms of full advice once we've got further clarity on both the capital flexibility regulations, the capital receipts timing, and the timing of any transformational change.
I think there was a slight confusion on the question that I was asking. I wasn't asking whether we would use capital receipt for transformation. I was asking if a capital receipt came in, would we be permitted to use it for transformation? What is your assessment at the moment? Does that seem likely that we would be permitted to use it for transformation?
One of the options within the flexibilities allows for that, but obviously that hasn't concluded.
Thank you. I really appreciate that answer. Thank you. In terms of some of the reserves that are there, the change in digital reserve, I understand that there are a few £1 million, a couple of £1 million there, not actually allocated in the 5-year plan. There is a adults risk reserve, which has £3.75 million at the moment, not committed in the 5-year plan. There's a funding review shortfall reserve, which I'll come back to in a moment, with £7.5 million this year, but £4.66 million does not get used, is not yet allocated over the 5-year plan. I think that's it. There's a Ukraine grant reserve, which is not ring-fenced. £2 million could be redeployed apparently. So just picking up those reserves which aren't fully allocated over the years, could you give a percentage for, maybe 1 to 100%, how likely it is that if I take one adults risk reserve out of 100%, how likely is that you have to use that for adults? Is it 100%?
I can't answer in the way that the question has been phrased, because I think what we're recognising there is that there is a continued risk related to the demography, price, demand factors that history and trend would show there is a requirement for that reserve. But clearly, as the data moves forward, there's any additional requirements from the likes of Care Quality Commission, CQC, comes forward, that would be a reserve that would be called upon from that. So I can't answer the way it's been phrased. Okay,
let me try it a different way on the adult risk reserve. The government's just announced £500 million for social care. We estimate that £4.5 million will come to Cambridgeshire County Council, roughly speaking. There might be some strings attached. You've, as a Section 151 officer, you've signed off the budget in front of us as being robust. You've described the reserves as adequate. So if nothing else changed, is it theoretically possible that the £4.5 million coming in, which could be used for any social care, could actually been used instead of the adults risk reserve? So if nothing else changed, is that theoretically possible? Thank you.
Again, I can't deal with theory. I can only deal with facts. And until the final settlement comes out and I know exactly what the position is in terms of any government intention of that reserve. I can't deal with that. I have to deal with the facts as I know today, and simply I don't have the settlement. It's good that County Council Network have lobbied and achieved what they achieved. It is not helpful for strong financial planning to have figures this late in the day. And as I said in my introduction to this, there will need to be a further revision once that fact is known in terms of advising council, assuming that we will have that before the 13th of February.
Councillor
Okay,
Camp,
let me-
how many more questions have you got? I'm wondering if we could
Until I
take them.
finish, Chair, if that's okay.
Well, could we take them as a block?
No, because they're a question and answer session, as you can see. It's
Well,
literally.
this is not a question and answer session. This is a committee meeting.
Sorry, I mean.
Please, could you ask your questions and then I'll ask Michael to respond to them? Because
Okay.
otherwise this is becoming a question and answer session, and I don't think that that's how we normally run these meetings.
No, I appreciate that, that you don't normally run it this way, but here we are with a new report in front of us that comes to a conclusion, which I'm going to come to now then, which makes very difficult for the amendments to come forward that we expect to come forward. So I'm just going to talk one final question then, if I may. I'm disappointed by this, of course, because I thought this was our job to scrutinise what's in front of it. So I'm just going to look at the wording. Could you take me to the wording, please, where it says there is no opportunity for a further call on. I've just moved the page. Sorry.
So just when
Can you
you're
take me to the wording where it says there is no opportunity for a further call on general fund reserves or earmarked risk reserves in 2024, 25 or later years.
Sorry, so that's paragraph 14.5. Oh, 173.
to be clear, Councillor Count, I'm not wanting to shut you down. I'm just wanting you to ask your questions in a block and then I'll come back to Michael.
Bear with me 1 second, please, Chair, if you may. 173 and thank you. 173, and that is in agenda item number 6, the business and financial plan. Yep.
Let's assume so.
So the point I'm trying to make here, Chair, is that is in the business and financial plan. It says as included in the financial sustainability assessment, was the financial sustainability assessment, the section 1 officer is the reserves are robust. The wording is incredibly different that used in the business plan as to that used in the financial sustainability assessment, which is signed off. It is completely different. Robust is not the same as you cannot touch these reserves no matter what in the next 5 years.
I think they're different reports, but Michael, do you want to respond on that point?
I'm just checking, Chair, if that's the last question or block. I just don't want to respond.
Was that the last question, Councillor Camp? Yes.
So the first item is looking at the 4-year sustainability position and the assessment of reserves. And this is why this item is being considered first in order to have scrutiny. In then the paper that is going forward in terms of the next item, I'm making a statement in the conclusion of that report based on this assessment. So one leads into the other.
Thank you very much. Stephen, I think you wanted to make a comment.
Thank you, Chair. Actually, just a point of clarification for the benefit of members and recognising how this has been handled previously. The Section 25 assessment has always been conducted by Cambridgeshire County Council's finance team, but it's historically been tucked into the overall budget and business plan report. So whilst the assessment has been done, it hasn't necessarily been conducted to this depth or to this rigour. And Michael, as our statutory chief financial officer, has quite rightly felt it necessary to bring that forward as a separate report for committee and also to ensure the level of scrutiny that it's being given. I think that's also in recognition of the overall financial state of local government and making sure that that's given the prominence it deserves rather than it being a few paragraphs in a much wider report. So I just thought that clarification was helpful, both for members, but also for the public. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I agree. I think that the position that local government is in has never been more perilous, and that's indicated by the very large number of Section 114s that there have been this year, and the lobbying that CCN have been doing around the number of particularly upper tier and unitary authorities who, if not issuing Section 114 notices this year, have been very clear that if local government finance continues in the way that it is, they will be in that position quite soon. I just wanted to pick up another couple of points, but I'll let Councillor Bowden come in first and then Councillor Sharp.
Thank you very much indeed, Lucy. Just before you called me, of course, I pressed the wrong button on my computer and I've lost my screen entirely, but I'll work from memory as best I can. I believe it's paragraph 3.34 in the report that we've got in front of us, to do with the income from council tax and from NNDR. It might be 3.34. Again, I'm working from memory. Have you got that, Michael?
I'm around that section, so maybe if Councillor Bowden asks the question, if it's a different paragraph, I'll look at that then.
It's to do with the, well, let me first of all say I very much welcome, as just explained by the Chief Executive, that we are looking here at principles before we start looking at detailed numbers. And I think that's a very useful separation out of the work which we have to do. And as the paragraph that I have now lost quite clearly says at the beginning, the majority of the funding that we receive in this authority comes from council tax and comes from NNDR. And in fact, the figure of next year is what, some £475 million from memory. So it's a very substantial majority of the funding that we've got. And therefore, it's very appropriate that we look at that extremely carefully. And I know very often when we are looking at budgets and we're looking at medium-term financial strategies, we so much concentrate on the expenditure rather than necessarily on the income side. So I'd just like to divert us slightly here to the income side and to look at the figures which are in this report. And what struck me was the figure of just over £2 million, which is shown as being a provision to be carried forward. And I was struck by that in two ways. The first one was £2 million is a very small number compared with 475 million. It's less than a half of 1%. But I'm also aware, much more from Finland, I have to say, than from the rest of the county. I'm also aware of the surprisingly resilient collection rates that there have been, both on NNDR and on council tax. It certainly surprised me. So maybe justifying a smaller figure for provision than might otherwise be relevant. Now, of course, both on NNDR and on the council tax, we've got the collection fund and the way in which the collection funds work, which is quite arcane in many ways, but nevertheless, it's the way in which we must account for monies which come into us from the NNDR and also from council tax. But even given all of that, that figure of 2 million, which is less than 0.5 of 1%, is that figure really an appropriate figure? I know how it's been calculated. We've looked at the past trends, and I have to say that currently we're doing better than I would have expected. But how resilient is that figure of 2 million? And maybe looking on the other side of things, when we look at the medium-term financial strategy and we look at the projected income from NNDR and from council tax for future years, I note some very interesting and quite possibly correct, but some very interesting assumed increases. And I'm not at all sure where we are getting that data from. I know council tax and NNDR are two separate things, but I'd really be interested to know, again, from the point of view of resilience, are we using estimates here which are reliable in terms of the projected increase in total receipts? I know those are two separate questions, but I know that Lucy's quite keen for us to consolidate our questions. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you, Chris, and thank you for the consolidation. Michael.
Thank you, Chair. And just for clarification, it's 3.35 on page 99. And thank you for the recognition that income is just as important to appraise as well as expenditure. Clearly, we do rely a lot on the districts in terms of their estimates and forecasting, and we're in regular contact with them. The actual business rates position is based on 4 returns to government throughout the year, including an outturn called NNDR 1 to 4. And we're continually working with our district partners on those assumptions. Just in relation to the question, the resilience of the 2 million would be suggested based on the current trend. We're clearly post-pandemic now. We did see a change in that position. The position across the county can vary, but we work with the districts to make that assumption, and then we'll do the collection fund account at the year to see where that position is. So that figure is felt robust. In terms of going forward and the increases, we are aware of the business rates revaluation and the impact that will have in the coming years, and the potential changes to that and the appeals process. So specifically in relation to that, we expect that would increase, as would be the normal trend in any revaluation period, and that could impact on our level of income.
Chris.
Thank you, Lucy. That was an extremely helpful answer, if only because you've thrown something into the mix that I hadn't taken into account. I had assumed that the majority of the increase which was being projected on NNDR was to do with new development and additional NNDR sources of income. Are you now telling me that that is wholly to do with projected increases to do with revaluations, or is it a combination of the two?
It is a combination of the two.
I'd be really grateful, and this committee isn't the right place to go into this sort of detail, but would you be kind enough, Michael, to send me the details of those calculations to show how they have come about? Because the numbers, as we said, this is the most important part of our budget in a sense. They're the biggest numbers that we have in our budget, even though we sometimes think it's on the expenditure side, it is really on the income side. And I'd be really grateful to see that, because we're talking here about tens of millions of pounds of increase a year. And I'd just be really interested to see that, because you mentioned the NNDR1, but the NNDR1 report doesn't give any indication at all, to the best of my knowledge, of what's going to happen in 25.6, 26.7 or 27.8. It's very much a real-time document. And I don't know where this data has fully come from, especially if part of it is to do with suggested increases in the base that we've got, quite apart from the valuation. So I'd be really grateful to have some indication about that, and if the detailed figures could be sent through to me.
Quite happy to pull together a briefing on this. I'd be quite happy to continue the technical conversation, but probably a briefing is better.
I think I'm going to suggest that that's a briefing that goes to Chris and not necessarily to everyone else in the committee. Although, Chris.
May I suggest, Lucy, that you as leader should be interested in where our money is coming from?
I was about to say, maybe it could come to me as well.
I know that we spend 95% of our time in this organisation talking about expenditure, but that income is really a very, very important part, and the assumptions which underlie it are also very important. So may I suggest that you volunteer to receive that as well as me?
But I'm very happy to do that, and I was about to say I think it should probably come to me as well, but I think it probably is a level of detail that doesn't need to go to everybody. Thank you very much, and thank you, Michael. Alan.
Thank you, Lucy. I've got 2 questions, and I'll ask them both, and then the first one's on 3.25, and it's around, that mentions the GCP there, and potential delays to Section 106 receipts. Obviously, their numbers come through our accounts because of the way it's settled. I just wonder what risk, if any, there is in there. And the second one is on 3.36, and we talk about there that there will be expected, the medium-term plan some limited use of reserves in future years, etc. I just wonder, and it touches then onto 3.42 on page 100 and table 6. That obviously we know, and I know from the 2 committees I sit on, there are some challenges, and I'm not picking on it, but if I take children, young peoples, we've mentioned the challenges around DSG, and we've got the challenges to home to school transport and children in care. And I know there've been mitigation plans or plans put in place to try and, but as I said at committee, those are possibly ambitious, but I hope they succeed. But then if I look at table 6, and it's the last but one line, the MTFS support reserve of 16.803 on the 1st of April 24 is reducing to 7.395 1st of April 2025. Is that basically the mop up for any potential overspends? Thank you.
Are you happy to take those, Michael?
In relation to the first point, in relation to 3.26 and the GCP, the point that making there is that, sorry, 325, not 326. In relation to our treasury management, we are expecting that the cash flow issues there will be picked up by the GCP. And reprofiling within their scheme if there were to be that, and managed within that program. So I'm just flagging that we are not providing for that. And then in relation to I think the point is actually table 6 and the MTFS support. That is a continuation of the decision at council in February 2023 that the medium-term financial plan includes the use of the pandemic monies spread across the future years as a support for the delivery of that programme.
Thank you. Elisa.
Thank you, Chair. I was going to make 2, well, they're comments, I suppose, rather than questions, but if I end up asking a question, I'm sure Michael will answer it. The first comment is about reserves, and we spent some time earlier talking about reserves, and as we read the executive summary at the top of this document, I mean, the first bullet point does say the reserve levels are considered to be adequate, but it then goes on to make 3 further bullet points effectively qualifying that judgment. And I think we need to understand that when our Chief Financial Officer proclaims our reserves to be adequate, he does that with the knowledge of what it would mean if he were to declare them inadequate. You know, we're talking here about, this is a formal assessment. This isn't a qualitative judgment that which then effectively goes down to the graph, which is called chart 1, near 3.7, 3.8, which shows you effectively what we expect our reserves to do over the medium term. And the general reserve, which is there as the basic block, which doesn't move very much, and the risk reserve, which also is there as a basic block and doesn't move very much because most of our risks are for the medium term. Everything else does move because they are reserves with other purposes. And I think it is important to note that while this is what should happen and what we want to happen, there is risk and things do happen. So we can't make any definite judgments at the moment as to whether we can go into reserves and make further changes over the medium term. And I think the point that was being picked up earlier about the difference in wording between the 2 reports is caused by this, because on the one hand, you have the discussion about the sustainability of your path, which is what we've got now, and then you've got the decisions you make year on year. So that's the first point I wanted to make. The other point I wanted to make, and I would be grateful if I've said anything that isn't true, then please do shout. The other point I wanted to make was in relation to, so I'm here on 3.31. Now, Michael, this report is fantastic, and I think everything in it is extremely important reading for everyone at the moment. But if I had to pick 2 paragraphs for everyone to read over everything else, I would choose 3.31 and 3.32 just because of the picture that they paint. When 75% of our net revenue is council tax, and there is absolutely no long-term underwriting of our revenue budget, which was the case prior to 2010. The position that we're in is quite precarious, hence everything else that we've been talking about. We don't have underwriting and we don't have index-linked funding. These absences are felt. They're felt very strongly, and we have discussed this. We have discussed this at length over the last couple of years. We've had motions to full council, and we have cross-party called for a review of the funding formula. We've called for that since first day I was elected. We've called for that every day since. It hasn't happened. It's not going to happen before the general election. The picture that this paints is going to be a problem for everyone who's in charge of this council, I suspect, for the next 10 years, because these things take quite a long time to turn around. So in closing, I would like to thank Michael for this, and I am hoping that we all internalize the discussion about sustainability effectively before we go on and discuss expenditure, because as Chris rightly points out, we spend a lot of time talking about what to do with the money we have. But we really ought to be thinking about where that money comes from and just what profile it has over the medium term, because that's changed quite significantly in the last 10 years. Thank you.
Thank you. I don't see any other hands, so I'm going to make a couple of comments myself and then come. I thought we had asked questions and we're on to comments. Okay, Steve, you can have a comment.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I'm glad you indulged me, because it was clear that the questions were stopped. So I'll go into the comments of where I feel where we are with that. The assessment that the reserves is adequate, I support that. I agree with that, that they're adequate. However, in the recommendations, it says that they need to be further enhanced. Now, I think that for my own sanity, I've drawn considerable doubt as to a number of the graphs used, but by the fact that they're not complete enough when they take in our asset base or our investments and the amounts allocated to that. When I look at the way that the adequacy has been translated into the next paper as no further call, which is a very different statement, I don't agree with that whatsoever. Now, it is beholden upon us as members to take heed of the Section 151 officer's advice. I believe that I have taken heed of his advice. I believe that I've taken this committee through a number of points that we should consider when we are paying attention to that advice. I was surprised to hear that we only deal in facts, not theory, when we have a 5-year budget in front of us that is largely based on theoretical positions, such as inflation, demography, income, etc. None of these are fact. They will only become fact once the date that they have happened has passed. They are based on realistic assumptions for moving ahead. And that can be a fangraph for many people. And one person's, shall we say, one person's meat may be another person's poison. The entire business plan after the coming year, this coming year proposal, is based on a 2% council tax rise. And we know from past history that the joint administration is willing to go to the maximum amount on a regular, if not inevitable basis. And therefore, I think that there's a slight de-risk going on there. Taking all of that into consideration, I feel that I cannot support the recommendations. The recommendation includes things that I do agree with, such as they are adequate at the moment, but they do not do not support things that they go on to say, saying that there will need to be further strengthening of reserves. And certainly I don't want to give any indication that when we get to the business plan, that I was supportive of a position that indicates the change of wordings, that there can be no further calls on those reserves. So for that reason, I will not be supporting this recommendation, Chair.
Thank you. I'll come back to the recommendation at the end because I'm slightly surprised if you're not going to support it. But anyway, just to make some comments of my own, I think, before we draw this to a close. First of all, I would like to thank Michael for this paper. I think this paper is very much about risk and about our Section 151 officers' assessment of the risks facing this council. And as has been referred to a number of times already, we can see local government facing extraordinary risks at the moment. Those are partly related to 10 years of very significant reductions in the spending power of local government, but they're also related to what has been a very volatile period for the economy of the world, really. I don't think it would be wise for us to expect that volatility in the global economy is likely to reduce anytime soon. Moving on to some of the comments that were made by Councillor Count in his assessment of this paper. The first of those that I'd like to just unpick slightly is around our borrowing and our invest to save. And he raised some questions about whether the scale of our borrowing might be slightly less risky because it was invest to save. And I think it's worth pointing out that many of the councils that have found themselves in particular trouble with their and had to present Section 114 notices, some of which have been in the most extraordinary trouble, and whose residents are left carrying the burden of their strategies. Those strategies have been based on investments, investments that in many of those cases did not turn out to be quite what the councils were expecting them to be. But that does not mean that investments are not risky. Investing can be very risky. I do not think that the level of investment that this council has is of extreme level of risk, but I don't think that we should take the fact that some of our borrowing is based as is focused on investment as meaning we should not be concerned about it. It still presents a risk to this council. Secondly, I wanted to move on to the adults reserve, the adult social care reserve, and the relationship between that and the way in which demography and inflation have been treated in putting together the future budget. And I think if one of the things that there is a lot of work that goes into looking at how inflation and demography are managed within the budget. If we make assumptions about demography and inflation, which are optimistic or very slightly optimistic, that leaves us with risk. And that adult social care risk is important, and having resources to cover it is therefore important. The final thing I wanted to come on to was your comment about me having left a glowing report of the previous administration. That is definitely not something that I recognise doing. I do recognise saying that I thought that we had been left in a slightly less bad position than some other places. And I continue to say that we are not in as bad position as, say, Somerset, for example. We are not having to plead with government to ask for a 10% council tax rate as a result of the legacy that has been left us by our Conservatives. However, I would not say that that was a glowing report, and I do think that the risks facing this council are very high. I'm now going to come on to the recommendation for this paper. And the reason that I was slightly surprised that you're not going to support it, Councillor Count, is that the recommendation is that we scrutinise the Section 151 officers' assessment, which I believe we have done quite thoroughly, and note the conclusions in consideration of the budget. So given that we are only asked to scrutinise and note and not to agree with it, I wonder whether you're still unwilling to support it.
Yeah, playing with words, Chair, because if you look at the executive summary, it says it concludes that reserves will need to be further strengthened. Now, I can't agree with that. The recommendation refers to that, so I can't. Okay, I'm happy to accept that, but I wasn't expecting that you would necessarily have to agree with it. This is the officer's assessment. Okay, we will move to the recommendation. So it's clearly needing to take a vote on this. All those in favour of the recommendation that we scrutinise the Section 151 officers' assessment, if you could indicate now, please. And those against? And any abstentions?
Chair, the result of the vote is 8 votes in favour, 7 votes against, no abstentions. The motion is therefore carried.
Thank you very much. And we will move on to item 6 on the agenda, which is the business and financial plan, which is introduced by Stephen.
Thank you, Chair. I'll just make a few points in introducing the business and financial plan for 2024-2029. We'll also hand over to Michael following my opening remarks, because I'm conscious a large proportion of this report pertains to the budget, and certainly the proposed budget for this committee to consider, following service and policy committees having already scrutinised elements of the budget in their own respects. Number of observations from me. One, to note that this is both the business and financial plan of the council, so I don't want to underestimate the importance of the strategic framework, which is included within this set of papers. That incorporates the council's approved vision, which was approved in February 2022, and the subsequent update to that strategic framework against the council's 7 approved ambitions. That demonstrates the progress the authority has made towards delivering those ambitions and further areas of progress that need to be made over the next period. It also purposefully draws out commentary in relation to progress with the Closer to Communities, formerly known as decentralisation activity, which all parts of the council are intended to support. The second thing I wanted to reference in introducing this paper to members is obviously to note the contents of the consultation that has been undertaken. Unlike previous years, the authority has undertaken 2 periods of consultation in developing this business plan and budget. The first was our intensive and statistically significant quality of life survey, which has previously been reported to this committee and included stratified and direct interviews with 1,100 individuals living in each of the 5 district and city areas. That's been subsequently complemented by the online budget consultation that we have undertaken, the response to which is included in the appendices to this report. The final thing that I wanted to do, Chair, before I hand over to Michael, was just come back to this matter of additional funding that was announced through written ministerial statement by the Secretary of State last week. I'm very conscious we have already touched on that in this meeting today, but I think, again, just to rehearse some of that for the benefit of both members of the committee, but also for members of the public and indeed potentially the media. It's an opportunity to thank the County Councils network for their strenuous, active and very well led lobbying of central government. As members of this committee and indeed hopefully more of our elected members will be aware, the County Councils network represents Cambridgeshire along with a number of other county and upper tier authorities, and lobbied very hard on behalf of those authorities to government to seek additional funding. And that was particularly focused on areas around social care, more so children's social care, home to school transport and SEND provision. A letter was duly signed by 46 members of Parliament. That letter was made public. And of course, I was gratified to see that one of our MPs chose to sign that as well. We are, of course, part of the County Councils network, so it was very helpful to see the lobbying led by the leader of Nottinghamshire County Council through the all-parliamentary group in respect of this matter. The letter was submitted directly to the Prime Minister and to the Secretary of State for Levelling Up, signed, as I say, by 46 MPs, including a number of former Secretaries of State and Cabinet Ministers. That letter was really important in terms of the outcomes and clearly was something that government took seriously, leading to the Secretary of State's written ministerial statement last week, leading to a range of additional funding being announced. As the Section 151 officer has already advised members, we await the detail of that, and it's probably that point, Chair, that I was just going to come to in concluding my opening remarks. Whilst we, of course, welcome additional monies, and we await to see the detail of what that looks like, at this stage, we have no clarification on whether or not that will be recurrent funding that is built into our base allocation going forward, or that will be one-off funding for the County Council. So that detail is important. The second detail that's important, Chair, is you rarely seen government provide additional money without additional caveats, and that's any government, not just this current government. So I understand we are expected to produce something called a local productivity plan as part of the written ministerial statement from the Secretary of State last week. As yet, no details of those requirements and caveats have been published or shared with the sector. So again, we await that along with confirmation of the funding that we are likely to receive. As Michael said, further progress on the 5th of February and then subsequently parliamentary debate, I think on the 7th of February. So more to come in this space. So I Yes, Chair, my concluding remark on the additional money is to thank the County Council's network and other bodies for lobbying effectively on our behalf and other upper tier authorities' behalf, but also to recognise that, if I may say, the devil is in the detail. So I look forward to seeing the detail that goes with the additional monies or new monies that have been announced by government. At that point, Chair, probably a good segue to Michael. Thank you.
Thank you, Michael.
Thank you, Chair. Just picking up and leading off from that, members will note that there are changes to this report financially from that it received on the 19th of December when there was a £2 million gap identified. As members will see from this paper, that gap is now closed. That gap has been closed due to additional income rising from business rates, as we were discussing in the last item, a change in the new homes bonus continuation, as well as some further adjustments to the base projections. As the Chief Executive has just noted, we await any further statements. So that's set out at 4.1 to 4.3 and section 6. There was an additional proposal and prioritisation came through from scrutiny. A number of committees, including those held last week, identified the prioritisation of a further request, and a further £100,000 has been identified for emergency planning, paragraph 4.1 through that additional funding. And finally, just to note, the document also now contains 3 additional strategies in support of the paper and the conclusions. That's the medium-term financial strategy, treasury and capital strategies.
Thank you very much, Michael. So questions on this report? I think we normally do questions first, but I'm quite happy to take the amendment. And again, I think that we had agreed we'd accept this one. Am I right about that? Yeah. Yes. So I think we're going to accept this amendment as well, if that's helpful to know. But I'll let you introduce it before I tell you that, which was the wrong way around. So is that Chris or Steve is introducing it?
Yeah, thank you very much for that. Yeah, the amendment, which obviously we learned about after these papers were published, was the government announced £500 million for social care. As the Section 151 officer and the Chief Executive correctly said, we don't know the full details of that. However, the point is, whilst these papers have been published, we're hoping to have the details before the full council papers are published. If we didn't get it in there, this is our last chance to not ask the council taxpayers for 5%. Everything else can be adjusted post-council. You can have environments, you can have budget setting, you can change highways money for adult social care, etc. Within reason, everything else can be changed. But the one thing you can't change is whether you need the 5%. So to have this in front of us on that date, I think is vital. So I really appreciate your support in this. And also the second part of this, because I understand in the announcement, the government doesn't want to see extra money put into reserves, and neither do we. So I think that's the second part, and I'm glad to hear that there's going to be some support for this. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Does any, and are you seconding it, Chris? And you don't need to speak. Is that no? Mark is seconding. That's fine. I think it's simply recognising that we are expecting this money to come, and it will need to be taken into account in the budget process that is ongoing. I have to say, it's not an ideal situation for the government to be producing this money at this late stage after all this work has been done. And for those of us who spent many hours trying to get the budget to the position of the published papers, to then suddenly find that everything's changed again at the last minute because government have recognised just what the crisis situation is frustrating. However, it is important that we recognise it in our papers, and I'm happy to accept the amendment on that basis. So any further questions on this, Chris?
Thank you, Chair. May I start with Appendix 1A, please? I'm sorry to say it's a bit of a continuation of the questions I was asking before, but I think nevertheless it's the numbers involved are so large that I think I'm justified in asking these questions. And 1A is our financial plan update 24-29, showing projected figures between 24-25 and 28-29. And I'll try consolidating. I know you like things to be consolidated, so since they're on the same page, I'll consolidate two questions here. We were talking before about council tax and business rates, and what was, which are of course far and away the most important funding source that we have as an authority. And I was questioning the way in which assumptions have been made in order to produce the figures going forward from 24.5 to 28.9. And if we look at the figures we've got in front of us for council tax and business rates, estimated income, for 24.5, we've got 474 million. And for 28.9, we've got 536 million, which is an increase of 13% over 4 years. Now, given both the increase in the base that there will be, both for the council tax and for business rates, because of increase in house building, and also because of the increase in businesses which are being set up, let alone revaluations which may take place, and given the escalator which effectively exists in the increases which are in the rates which are applied in terms of council tax, having an increase over 4 years of 13% seems to me to be remarkably low as a figure. And Lucy, you know that I'm also the leader of a council and also the portfolio holder for finance in this council. So I know how assumptions which are made can have a dramatic effect on a medium-term financial strategy. And common sense tells me that those numbers are too low in the later years. Therefore, skewing significantly, because we're talking about tens of millions of pounds here, skewing significantly projected deficits in future years. That's my first question, and I'll consolidate it with the second question because it's on the line beneath. And that is the general government grant figures which are shown. And putting it roughly, just roughly, the figures are 2024-25, 62 million, 25-26, 90 million, 26-27, 90 million, 27-28, 90 million, 28-29, 90 million. Now, I really would love to have some indication of why it's assumed that there will be a virtual increase by half of our general government grants between 24-25 and 25-26, and then no effective increase at all is being budgeted for in our MTFS between 25-6 and 28-9. Something looks wrong there. So those are my two questions.
Michael, I think those are for you.
Yeah, I'll also ask Tom or Stephen as well, just to come in on that latter point, re the grants. Just in relation to the council tax and business rates, again, assumption that was noted before that I think is shared in the report in terms of a 2% uplift in council tax has been assumed, plus 1.5% increase in tax base, and a business rates linked to inflation, and 2% is within the plan. And then the assumption in relation to the government grants is that in 25-26, as we understand it, the public health grant will be rolled into the general grant, and that explains the change from the 61 to the 90.
Thank you. Stephen, do you want to pick up the other point? No, all done. You comfortable with those, Chris?
Oh, I'm very grateful for the explanation about the 30 million, which I was aware of and hadn't linked in correctly to the numbers which are in here. So that's extremely helpful to see. I still don't believe that the numbers are going to be those numbers at the end of the day. I believe the assumptions which are being made are very cautious, too cautious in a sense. And the reason I say too cautious is that it may skew the decision-making of this council on the assumption that the projected deficits for those future years, some years out, are a realistic assessment of the situation. And I'm sorry to say, I fear that 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 may be misleading to us.
Thank you. Michael, do you want to come back and?
I wouldn't use the word misleading. I think it's prudent based on the level of information that we are aware of today. And quite simply, we have no direction from government in terms of the future position related to either council tax reform, council tax upper thresholds, or business rates assumptions. And without that, what we'll have to do is look at that position. It is far enough out that it means that, clearly as we bring this forward this time next year, one would hope that there is greater clarity around those numbers, and clearly that is something we continue to update this council about, and we'll do that, including the impact on reserves discussed in the last item.
I'm grateful for those comments, and I fully agree with the comments made by Michael, especially that these figures are prudent. I do have a second set of questions on a totally different part of this paper.
Can I just pick up before you move on to your second question, then just to comment on the conversation that you just had? So I absolutely recognise and agree that the figures that are there will not end up being the figures that are there next year or the year after or the year after that. And I also recognise that the government grant figure is unlikely to be that figure, just as all the others are unlikely. I think that there is a wide sense of scepticism about many of the government's spending plans at the moment, and we will see what happens post-general election, regardless of who wins, about whether those spending plans are realistic. But the point that I really wanted to make is that there's been a certain amount of focus in that conversation on the assumptions that have been made in the funding side of the argument. There are also a set of assumptions that have been made around expenditure. If you look at the figures for inflation and demand and pressures, those are also assessments, and somebody has to be making assessments that are realistic and prudent and balance risk against other things in the expenditure as well as on the council tax. And I would perhaps suggest that actually there's been a certain amount of pressure placed on the inflation and demand figures in order to make sure that those are not overestimated. This is all of these figures are about making guesses about what's going to happen in the future. That's what 5-year budgeting is. We have an extremely experienced and I think impressive financial team who have to make those assessments, and they have to make them against a very uncertain backdrop. I just think it would be unfair to focus only on the funding side and not on the expenditure side. Michael, and then I'll come back to you, Chris, sorry.
I think, Chair, if it's helpful just to clarify, first of all, I don't know the winning numbers to tonight's lottery, just as I don't know the numbers in 5 years' time. What we are flagging to the council, both in the medium-term financial planning and in terms of the reserves assessment, is that there is a need to put considerable focus on the way that we challenge, manage and change our income and expenditure, particularly our expenditure. And what we wouldn't want to do in a failure of our duty was not to draw the attention to the difficult situation that this, as other councils find themselves in over the next 3 years. This will require significant attention and significant change. And whether the figures end up being 5% or 10% out, I think what is clear is that there is a significant deficit in local government financing overall. There is a significant deficit in the structure and ask of local government flowing through from policy, and that needs to be addressed both at a national and local level. And we're drawing that to members' attention in order to effectively work as we move forward as officers and committee, and that's the purpose of the MCFP.
Thank you very much. Sorry, Chris, back to your next question.
Thank you. Just before I do that, just to comment, I'm putting party politics aside. I fully agree with the comments which have just been made by Michael. They are just the way things are, I'm afraid. And I would like to publicly disagree with one of the comments that you made, if I may, Lucy, when you said that our officers are putting guesses before us. They're putting informed guesses before us, and I would like that qualification to be noted. Right. The second point I'd like to make is on Appendix 2, Section 7 of the plan, that is the Treasury Management Strategy, and particularly Appendix 4 to that, which is the Minimum Revenue Provision Policy Statement. Now, believe it or not, I have as my current bedtime reading the current DLUC guidance on minimum revenue provision and on capital financing requirements. And it sends me to sleep very easily indeed. It's quite lengthy, but I'm beginning night by night to get a handle on it, including the 4 options which are given, one of which in fact is 2 options, so it's really 5 options. And what interested me in this, well, there are 2 things which interested me. The first is that from my bedtime reading, I am aware that the policy is legally meant, although I say legally meant, all of these things are framed as guidance, but we're told that we must follow the guidance or have a very good reason not to. So basically, we've got to follow the guidance. And the guidance does state that every 5 years, you're meant to have a formal review of your MRP and CFR policy. And we haven't had one since 2015-16. And apparently, if what's in this report is correct, we are now 3 years overdue in having a formal review. That's what Appendix 4 states, and that surprised me. So I thought that it was worth bringing up as a question to ask just why have we left it so far beyond the 5-year guidance figure that we're told for a formal review. But the second thing which really struck me in this appendix was that we have VRP. Now, I was aware of the existence of VRP. I just didn't think it actually happened in practice. That is a voluntary revenue provision. And I was even more shocked when I saw that the figure for our voluntary revenue provision is £3.526 million. What do we intend to do with that £3.526 million and when? The paper does explain what it can be used for. I'm just interested to know what our intentions are with this £3.526 million and when we will believe that it is prudent for it to be used. Thank you.
Thank you. Michael.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. And absolutely agree in terms of the position that Councillor Bowden just raised there. In terms of the position, I was only discussing this with the Chief Executive and Service Director of Finance Monday, I think, on this. I think obviously there is consultation as it presently stands referred to, and we want to wait and see what that is. I know there was an ask before my time looking at a number of MRP reviews related to third-party loans, I think in 21-22. So there has been some partial review, but clearly now is the time to consider about the review of this. But we need to have the insight to what that conclusion is going to be from the consultations. We will carry forward that and enact that change. And the voluntary revenue provision was also made at that time. And for the life of me, Tom, I'm not recalling. Stephen, can you just help me out with that VRP? Sorry.
It was exactly as you said, Michael. There was a decision taken during a previous consultation where we assessed the voluntary provision on the third-party loans. We don't know the outcome of now this third stage of consultation, and just to confirm, the decision to make an overpayment was authorised by full council at the time as well.
So my understanding is that at this time we do not have any decision made as to what will be done and when with that £3.526 million, what is effectively an overpayment, the voluntary revenue provision.
But at the same time, we don't know what the outcome is of the MRP consultation and the likelihood of the need for that.
Thank you. I think you've uncovered some uncertainty. Congratulations. Steve.
Sorry, it's just on that point. I just couldn't follow what was being said about the consultation. Are we saying that the 3.528 is available for expenditure and we're consulting how to spend it? Or are we saying that the government, there's a consultation out that will decide whether or not it can be spent? Is that correct?
In essence, it's the latter. If there is a risk that's introduced, we have already made a voluntary provision which will cover us for the first year, subject to what happens with that consultation.
Can we get a detailed briefing though, just to really hone in on this so I can understand it fully? Thank you.
I'm sure that will be possible. Thank you. Any further questions on the business plan? Steve?
I thought you had other people queued. I was just nipping in there whilst this was. So in terms of questions and not comments, can I just go to page 268, please? In page 268, my reading is, this is about the holiday scheme vouchers, and I picked up that the eligible children will receive £135, and that is a £45 reduction from previous rounds where it was funded at 180. I don't remember picking this up elsewhere at the Children's Committee or anyone else. Can we know why and when this cut was made? And also, if it's being made here, I don't think I've picked up on a community impact assessment, or actually the latest version is not that word, but I think you take what I mean. So some questions there, please.
Stephen?
Perhaps if I start, Chair, and I suspect the Chair of Children and Young People's Committee may want to come in as well. The differential is, of course, the County Council is placing its own money behind the continuation of this scheme, which is to the order of £135. The previous £180 figure relates directly to the funding that was given by government, so there was a difference in the allocation. As I think members will be aware, the funding being provided for by government is due to come to an end. Therefore, the County Council's proposed budget includes continuation of that using our own revenue. We are unable to match the same level as government because of our overall financial position and balancing that out against other priorities. So the £135 is in effect the best use we can make of council revenue to continue a scheme that clearly supports individuals. However, on the point around discussion at Children and Young People's Committee, I clearly defer to the chair of that committee. Thank you.
Thank you. The figures were in the Children and Young People's Committee paper. 135, whilst it's not 180, it is a significant amount of money and does cover some funding for those holidays. And we do have evidence of how important this money is to families. I'd be delighted if you could lobby for the Household Support Fund to be continued. As of yet, we have no absolute as to whether it would or wouldn't. It has been a lifeline for our families and is a really important source of income for those. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, okay.
Can I just before we move on, can I just clarify one thing with probably Stephen? Because this money came from the Household Support Fund, in terms of us doing an assessment about withdrawing it, this is a withdrawal of government funding rather than of our own funding. And therefore it sits in a different position from if we were making a decision.
It's very different. Yeah, it previously came from government funding, which we, when we didn't have definite figures previously, we have said we would top up but didn't need to. This is purely from our own funds because we have no definite response from government as to what they're going to do with Household Support Fund.
It's just to pick up the impact assessment point that you raised, I think.
I'm not sure that really covers it because it's clear from the paperwork and from my own knowledge that, or I believe that previously the 180 was made up of government funds plus contributions from this council. So it's a mixed thing. So if there's a cut to a provision, surely it would have had a community impact thing. The fact that it's gone through committee unnoticed, you say it was in the paperwork, but it's clearly been unnoticed. I know that the council published details on how proud they were to be able to afford this, which, you know, one can applaud when you've got lots of money to splash about. But the council hasn't published any details on this cut, have they?
I don't think it's a cut, but I'll come to Michael, I think.
I can confirm that it was in the Children and Young People's papers that came forward, and in relation to the position, the potential drawdown was put there, and as yet that hasn't been drawn down at the year end. This is funded from government. Sorry, the current year is funded from the Household Support Fund. And going forward, it will be funded from the county council under these proposals.
So just for clarity, what's happening is that the council's contribution towards this is increasing significantly because the government contribution has disappeared, and that's why there isn't an impact assessment.
I think I need some more clarity, and I also need to say that I don't think that's accurate, which I'll come back to after I get some clarity. So are you saying that the next year, the year that we're discussing, 24-25, not the whole term, that will be totally funded by the HSF, and it's future years that will be funded by I'm asking the Section 151 officer, please.
So the current understanding, and we don't have any further confirmations from DWP or an equality impact assessment from them either, sorry, Department for Work and Pensions, who distribute this grant, is that will cease from the 31st of March, and therefore the proposals within the paper are for £3 million to be used to fund a provision of services for 24-25 set out as on page 268 in terms of the £135 payment.
Okay, thank you. And yeah, just in terms of wordings, there's been claims that it will not continue. And there's also been from Councillor Brioni, more accurately, we don't know whether it will or won't. I think it's a more accurate statement. There's been no statements in either direction, definitive ones. However, the Minister has said that they're looking at a transitioned phase out. I can report that today. So there is nobody saying it will end as much as there's nobody saying it will continue.
Even
Chair, perhaps if I can come in and pick up that latter point from Councillor Camp, which I think is helpful. As Councillor Camp will hopefully be aware, the leader, myself and he all joined a meeting through the County Councils Network last week with the Minister from Local Government, Simon Hoare. The Minister indicated that the Household Support Fund was a matter for the Department for Work and Pensions, as Michael has indicated. The Minister did suggest that there may be a tailing off of that monies, but he didn't indicate how long or how short that tail was. And from a prudence point of view, I think what we have been doing in terms of the financial planning for the County Council is, in the nicest way of saying it, prepare for the worst, hope for the best. So we are continuing to put council revenue funding behind the school meals approach because we recognise the need, but we can't do that to the same extent that was previously funded by government. And even although there may be some continuation of household support fund monies, at this stage we have no indication how or where that would be allocated, because some authorities will have an even more substantial reduction than Cambridgeshire when the household support fund dries up. So I think the reality is, again, devil in the detail, but of course, if there is any extended household support fund available to Cambridgeshire, we would welcome that. Thank you.
thank you. Michael.
Chair, just to confirm from the Children and Young People's papers, page 57 of the packs, and not the appendices, but the main body of the report has the exact same text.
Thank you. Tom.
Thank you, Lucy. Just a more general comment on Household Support Fund. This has got very confused. My understanding was that the Chancellor was asked at his autumn statement on the 22nd of November by a Labour MP, I think Stephen Timms, are you going to be funding Household Support Fund? He said he would. And then in the world of Whitehall, the Treasury said the next day that he'd misspoken. So as Stephen correctly pointed out, we don't have clarity on this, and we do need it. There's talk about it, a reduction in funding being tapered. Whatever, it would be lovely to see this fully funded by central government, but we simply don't have that clarity at the moment.
Thank you. Steve. Yep, comments is fine.
Thank you very much, Chair. I've made a couple of notes going through. Obviously, I don't support the recommendations. This is your proposal. It's made it very clear that we'll bring an amendment forward to full council, and therefore we can't support what's in front of us. And I think there's plenty of holes in there. I know you gave us some crumbs and devalued your comment earlier from a glowing report to you mentioned that the fact that we haven't left the council as abysmal as some other councils. But I'm going to be more generous. I'm going to say thank you to the current joint administration for some of the things they've did. Last year in our amendment to the full budget, there were 4 things we focused on. We wanted more money for highways because of the disaster, perilous state that they were in. We wanted you to reverse your weed killing policy, which was ill thought through. We wanted you to reverse your decision to cut the mental health budget, and we wanted you not to cut your winter gritting routes. All of those were in last year's budget. And I want to pay recognition in this year budget. You've achieved all of those. The gritting, the attack on the winter gritting is no more. There is some allocation to mental health. The weed killing is reversed, thankfully due to public pressure, because you wouldn't listen to us any other way. And the highways, there is a significant increase. Though on the highways, I would point out, I totally agree with Councillor Beckett when he says it simply isn't enough. You are not doing enough on the highways. It will not make the difference that you want it to make. If I just take a single example on the peat soil damaged roads, an extra allocation of 2 million this coming year and 3 million the year after, when you've identified a £300 million hole in the budget, it's not going to do anything. In fact, at the rate that you're spending it, the roads will only keep getting worse. So that's the point right. But thank you for the few things that you have managed to think clearly about this year. I'm disappointed in some of the cuts that you have made. We've just found one that you haven't really, we've had to dig out. And I think it would be prudent if I don't suppose many parents in this county sit and watch this, the joys of a council tax debate, a business plan debate. But if you're going to cut their holiday voucher entitlement to 108 from 180 to 135 pounds, I do think that you should let them know, issue a publication which will help them plan their year. I'm not saying I ever supported £180. I do think that there's a certain amount of responsibility for parents having their own children. However, I'm not here to say yes or no about that. What I am here is to advise you that if you're going to make this sort of cut that directly affects individual families, then I think that there is an onus on you to actually do something about it in terms of informing them as early as possible. In terms of the extra money coming in from government, that was extremely welcome. I think it was helped by lobbying. I supported much of what was said. I've always argued for a fairer funding formula for Cambridgeshire. And I think that, when we get these one-off payments, we know under the last administration, we received about £70 million in core funding increase due to lobbying that didn't come in through the revenue support grant that came in through other ways. And this is another indication it's going to come in this way. But I was surprised to see that Cambridgeshire County Council's signature on the CCN letter, where it complains about the new living wage being the increase to that being so massive and unfunded, whereas the county council had decided to actually pay over and above that with the real living wage. So I don't think you can have that both ways, but I am grateful for the individual, for the increase that did arrive. In terms of the cuts that have been coming through, cuts, it's amazing, isn't it? Because 3 years ago, everything the Conservatives did was a cut, and the joint administration are making efficiency savings. Oh my, how the words have reversed. But there we go. So yes, I can't support this. I think there's plenty for us to look at there. And I do thank the officers for enabling us to have a fully detailed debate on the subject.
Thank you for those comments and for the recognition of the things the places where we agree in this budget. I'll take those, that's fine. Does anyone else have any comments? Bryony?
I'd just like to comment that spending £3 million is definitely not a cut in my book. I know of an awful lot of very local councils who have said they cannot continue to fund free school meals. quite understandably so, with their own budgetary issues. I'm really pleased that as a council and as a joint administration, we've seen this as huge priority. We know that there are 4.2 million children living in poverty in this country, and that austerity has done nothing to assist our children. So I'm really delighted that we are not following the government lead to cut the free school meal vouchers, but are ploughing ahead and making sure that we can fund as much as possible for the children of Cambridgeshire.
Thank you. Lorna.
Thank you. I'm sure you would expect me to say something about the peat soil damaged roads, bearing in mind that it has such an effect in my division, and also that I'm a member of the Highways and Transport Committee. This is a problem that has been going on for some time. It hasn't suddenly emerged out of nowhere. The reports that we've seen at Highways and Transport Committee are clear that a sum of £5 million was made available in 2018 and a further sum in 2021. However, what has happened in that intervening period is the increase in the frequency and severity of extreme weather, which has really done extreme damage to a lot of those roads and made them disintegrate very quickly, or as one of my residents put it, in front of your eyes. Yes, £300 million would be lovely. We haven't got £300 million. We can't put that in out of reserves or whatever, wherever you want to magic that up from. We cannot find £300 million of our own resources to sort this problem out. But what we have got is an emerging and increasingly clear plan of action in the immediate, short, medium and long term, with the long term being the most important, which is to continue and increase the lobbying, which we have done individually and also collectively with surrounding authorities, to persuade government of the crisis that we are facing in mending our highways infrastructure, and to persuade them to find the funding that we need, the very, very significant funding, to be able to put matters right.
Thank you. I had a feeling I had one more, but I can't now see who it was. Philippa, did you want to say something? Yeah, that's right. That's who it was. Philippa.
Thank you. I must say I'm looking forward to Chris's forthcoming bedtime member briefings. I must get some new PJs from the Deluxe Night Garden. I think that might be slightly more factor-based than what we've heard from Councillor Count. Now, I'm afraid I don't share Councillor Bowden's optimism when it comes to business rate income. I have managed, and I want to thank the officers very much for actually enabling me to make some progress on understanding budgeting. I printed out 245 where we got the overview. And it's important what we can actually count on in the way of income. And I think it's very sensible to be almost pessimistic, certainly prudent when it comes to businesses, although we may well see some new ones coming up. We also see a lot of older ones going bust. Now, the high street is not a place that makes us optimistic when it comes to businesses flourishing. And if I understand it, that's what you need to get business rates. I stand to be corrected on that one. Nothing like the science of the quality of life survey, but we did have a meeting Friday night in Trumpington. Fairly mixed party in terms of loyalties, but people who are prepared to turn out on a Friday night to talk about local highway improvements in Trumpington. And it was something of a revelation to them to find out just how short term our planning is allowed to be. The difficulty and in some cases impossibility of investing sensibly in longer term planning. And we see this particularly in adult social care and indeed children social care as well, the children health care as well. And this does make it difficult. If we indeed have got a bit more for adult social care than we feared, then we will only be able to use it to rescue the things we thought we were going to lose. And I am increasingly, in all my dealings with the NHS, concerned about this steady build-up of damage that has been done by delayed treatment and delayed preventative care. And if we can put money back into things that we thought we might have to cut, that is great. And it is not a reason, I think, to hold back on the income we need from council tax. That would be my view. It is this short-term funding. It's not the responsibility of the gentleman opposite, and lady, gentleman opposite, but it is something that needs to be pointed out by all, and regretted by all, because it does make things very difficult for local government. One thing I can see we can plan ahead for, and I thank the officers, is things like better care funding. But I realise that to get the right sort of investment in supported housing for older people that helps with social care in the long run, makes it better delivered, it's more than bricks and mortar, will probably outlast me as a county councillor, but I should be doing my best.
Thank you. I don't see any other comments, hands, so I'll make a couple of comments myself. Oh, sorry, Elisa. Yes, Elisa.
I can go after you if you want, but I you know, just a few things, and they'll go back and forth a little bit. So first of all, you know, this will be a pub quiz question for the future. You know, can you predict the text of a letter that will have the signatures of both Daniel Zeichner and Priti Patel? As it turns out, whatever the text of that letter is, it's still not suitable for the rest of our Conservative MPs in this region to sign, and I think this is a disgrace, and I will say that now. In terms of the MRP, Chris will be delighted to hear that we seem to share quite a lot of bedtime reading, although most of mine was not done at bedtime because I fall asleep far too quickly. Michael will forgive me for referring to this graph that I've shown him many times as the thing with the two lines that go like this. He knows exactly what I'm talking about. I am also keeping a very close eye on where we are with the MRP. I also share his, I share Chris's question as to whether we should have had a formal review sooner. The thing is, as the graph with the two lines shows, the decisions that were made about the MRP that were made during the past administration have meant that there will be a pinch point at some point in the future where we will be forced to have that review in light of the risk that the MRP will start costing us. And that is a point that we don't want to reach. But it's still enough in the future that we can wait for the consultation as has been described by Michael. But, you know, this is just to say that we are looking at it. In terms of the living wage and the real living wage, I mean, I have absolutely no question about the fact that, you know, it's a good idea to raise the national living wage. We don't sign letters complaining about it. What we do complain about is the fact that, of course, if you're going to raise the national living wage, this has budgetary implications for us. So it would be welcome if government did it whilst recognizing that they can't take the credit for what is a good decision and let us deal with it financially. At the same time, we have to recognize the impact that poverty wages have on some of the least paid in our indirect, shall we call it, workforce, because the number of people that are below the previous, that are basically on the current or even previous, the number of people that we directly employ that are on the minimum wage is extremely low. The number of people that are on the minimum wage which are employed by our contractors is a lot higher. And if we are going to look after our social care sector, which is in dark crisis based on recruitment issues, you have to pay the real living wage. And we make absolutely no apologies for picking that up. Otherwise, the impact on our services would be severe. In terms of council tax, I am in many respects unsurprised, although there have always been surprises in the past few years, but I am unsurprised to see that as of the information that I have got, nobody at the moment in the entire country can afford to do less than what we have done, just because of how severe the situation is. You have heard that those people who are not doing 4.99% this year are the ones who are pleading with government to be allowed to do more than that, because they have larger budget gaps that need filling. And if we are going to tell our families, and I'll come on to I'll come on to the free school meals in just a moment. If we are going to tell our families that we're increasing council tax so that they, who are some of the poorest in our county, are going to be able to provide for most of the meals for their children during the school holidays, that is a very good use of council tax. I have argued this in my days of opposition. I have argued this all the time. Raising tax in order to fill your budget gap is not as good an idea as raising tax to increase the level of your services. And that's what we aim to do. And you can't in the same speech portray it as a cut, how dare you make a cut, and also how dare you raise taxes in order to actually make an investment and not a cut. That doesn't work, Councillor Count. And I should also remind everyone listening on, you know, the way that government has been engaging with us all along. If you have a budget gap, make creative use of our reserves or raise council tax. So there we go. I think the level of investment that is in this budget is astonishingly good for the situation we have got, which does not mean that it's as good as I would like it to be, but it is, but we are where we are. All the money that we are putting on our anti-poverty strategy, on supporting those experiencing poverty across the county who are more than they used to be. All that money that we are putting to continue the provision of free school meals in the face of the fact that government used to fund them and now doesn't. All of that is investment and not cuts, and this should be recognised. Thank you, Chair, that's it.
Thank you. Right, I will try and be brief because we're getting to the 2-hour point where we need to give Michelle a break. And I think we're coming to the end of this discussion. I think it's been a good discussion. I absolutely recognise that the Conservative members won't be supporting these recommendations. I would, to be honest, have been slightly surprised if you had. I think that the setting of the budget is the biggest point of the political year where we discuss our political priorities, and it is part of a democratic process that people have different political priorities and differences of opinion about what is important. I'm very proud of the priorities that are in this budget, but I understand that other people will have different priorities. It's good to discuss that. It's been a good discussion and a good debate. I also want to say that I think it's been one of the most open and transparent budget processes that I've ever been part of at this council. And I think that the taking of the full budget through all the scrutiny committees before it came back here for further discussion and then it goes to full council has been a very thorough process. I want to say thank you to all the officers who've been involved in developing this, but also to all the members, because actually there's been a phenomenal amount of work put into this by many officers across the council, but also many members, and I know that opposition members will also be working hard at looking at it very carefully before it comes to full council, where it will have its final discussion. It has been a really difficult budget round, as is clear across the whole country. I think I want to particularly thank Tom and Stephen, whose roles are often slightly more in the background, but who provide an extraordinary level of support to the members going through this process. So thank you both very much indeed. Finally, I want to say that the most important thing that we need to do in setting our budget is to make sure that we continue to be able to provide safe services to those residents in Cambridgeshire who rely on them. That is particularly important for our social care services, where residents rely on the council services very heavily, but it is also true for our roads, our street lighting. It is not easy to do that in the current financial climate. I think this budget sets that balance very well. That sense of safety and security needs to apply to making sure that those services can continue in the long term. And I think that will be very important for our discussions when we take this budget forward to full council. So I think we will now move to a vote. All of those in favour of the amended, very quickly, Steve.
Yeah, can we take all of H, which includes amendments, separately? I think we could support H as it stands with the amendment, and then all the others on block.
So A to whatever comes before H and then H separately.
A to G.
Thank
and
you.
then H.
Fine, so we'll take A to G first. So all of A to G, all those in favour, if you could indicate now, please. And all those against? And any abstentions? I don't think there are any.
Chair, the result of the vote for A to G is 8 votes in favour, 7 votes against, no abstentions. That part of the motion is carried.
Thank you. And now we'll move on to H. All those in favour, if you could indicate now. And I think that's unanimous. Thank you very much indeed. I think we are now moving into private session. No? Let's do the agenda plan and then we'll move into private session. If you're Oh, okay, fine. So it's just the agenda plan in that case, Michelle.
I have no additional items to add to the agenda plan or the training plan.
Any discussion or questions on the agenda plan or the training plan? I don't see any. In which case, I think that's the end of the meeting. Thank you all very much indeed, and see you in a couple of weeks. Thank you.